I've got my side of the job on this thing, and that's to see that she agrees to get on that stand.
Dead or alive?
Alive.
This is where it's all happening, baby. The rhythm of life.
These were the big-name legends of Hollywood's golden age. But away from the spotlight, a lot of them were actually much shorter than fans ever thought. Studios went to great lengths with camera tricks, apple boxes, and even trenches to make them appear taller. From rugged tough guys to charming romantic leads, these are the 12 golden age actors who were shockingly short. Mickey Rooney. Standing at just 5'2", Mickey Rooney holds the record as one of the shortest leading men in Hollywood history. But that didn't stop him from becoming MGM's #1 box office draw in the late 1930s and early 1940s. With his boundless energy, wide-eyed charm, and endless charisma, Rooney headlined the wildly successful Andy Hardy series and lit up the screen in musicals alongside Judy Garland. Unlike other short actors who constantly fought to look taller, Rooney's size actually worked in his favor at the start. MGM cleverly marketed him as America's boy next door, which meant his small frame fit right into the role of a teenager, even when he was already well into his 20s. In those Andy Hardy films, his stature wasn't a problem at all. In fact, it became part of his charm.
I am a Yankee Doodle boy. He's a Yankee Doodle man.
The real challenge came when Rooney started looking for more adult roles. That's when MGM got creative. They slipped him into custom-made shoes with 3-inch lifts, used special camera angles, and sometimes even placed him on hidden platforms to keep him level with taller co-stars. Directors would have the bigger actors sit down during certain scenes, while Rooney stayed standing. Cinematographer Harold Rawson even came up with lighting tricks to make Rooney's shadow stretch taller across the walls, giving audiences a subconscious sense of added height.
Didn't mean to be rough with you, but if a fella gets tired of people being sorry for him, he gets not to like it.
Costume designers did their part too, dressing him in vertical patterns and sleek cuts that made him look leaner and longer. But here's the thing about Rooney. Instead of running from his height, he eventually leaned into it. As his teenage stardom faded, he began taking roles where the height difference was used for laughs, especially when paired with statuesque actresses. That adaptability, along with his ability to laugh at himself and turn what others viewed as a weakness into a strength, kept his career thriving for decades. Spanning more than 80 years, Rooney never allowed his height to hold him back. In interviews, he often pointed out that even though he wasn't tall, he stood among giants in the industry. Directors who worked with him felt the same way. Clarence Brown, who directed National Velvet, noted that Rooney carried more talent in his 5'2" frame than most actors twice his size, adding that the camera captures presence, not inches.
Well, I don't know why I'm so pleased. The joke's on me. I'm saddled with a crazy horse I don't need.
Edward Robinson. Edward Robinson stood only 5 feet 5 inches tall. At first glance, he did not look like a Hollywood star. When he arrived in New York at 10 years old, fresh off the boat from Bucharest, he could only speak Yiddish and Romanian. He was not tall, he was not classically handsome, and on a Broadway stage, he hardly looked like a leading man. But Robinson turned what seemed like a weakness into his greatest weapon. He spent hours in front of mirrors, mastering every curl of his lips, every drop of his eyebrows, and a voice that hit like a hammer. When people laughed at the idea of a tiny gangster, he answered with a husky voice that filled the room. Then came the movie, Little Caesar, on January 9th, 1931. Robinson played Rico Bandello, a ruthless mob boss, and suddenly, no one cared about his height.
By sitting here in your office shooting yourself a solitaire? Well, that don't go no more. Not with me, I don't. We're done.
He dominated every scene. He did not need to look taller than the others, but his presence made them smaller. Time magazine wrote that his 5'5" frame filled the screen with menace, and it was no exaggeration. Warner Brothers grew nervous. They worried audiences would not accept a crime boss who had to look up at everyone. So the studio inflated his height, claiming he was 5'9". They shot him from low angles and made taller actors slouch or sit. But the success told the real story. Little Caesar cost around $280,000 to make and earned more than $1.5 million in the middle of the Great Depression. Robinson had not only proven them wrong, but he had changed the rules. By 1933, he was earning $85,000 per film, the equivalent of nearly $2 million today.
Well, you're just giving me a lot more good reasons why we have to get Costain.
Well, there might be reasons to us, but that doesn't mean they are to her.
He even won something rarely given, script approval, a privilege usually reserved for stars like Clark Gable. Robinson earned it one scene at a time. Off-screen, his size became part of his story too. During World War II, he volunteered for dangerous frontline USO tours. When asked why, he joked that a 5'5" target gave the Nazis half the chance. Behind the humor was real courage. Over the years, he gave more than $250,000 to anti-fascist causes and built an art collection valued at $3.5 million by 1956. James Cagney. James Cagney was the rugged guy who could light up the screen with a single glare, but he often played larger-than-life mob bosses and fighters, and was only about 5 feet 5 inches tall. In a town that prized tall, commanding leading men, he was one of the shortest stars to dominate the screen.
That depends just on when you saw me last, doesn't it?
Well, it must have been 30-some years ago.
Cagney became famous in the early 1930s for the movie The Public Enemy, where he played a violent gangster who shocked audiences with his cold-blooded ruthlessness. One unforgettable moment from that film was when he smashed a grapefruit into his girlfriend's face at the breakfast table.
I wish you was a wishing well, so that I could tie a bucket to you and sink you.
Scenes like that solidified his reputation as Hollywood's ultimate tough guy. Viewers believed every word, every punch, every glare, even though he wasn't towering over anyone. Cagney never let his height bother him. While other actors sometimes worried about how tall they looked, he brushed it aside and focused on his craft. He often remarked that it was not his size that mattered, but whether he could truly act. Cagney was explosive on screen, moving with a restless intensity that kept audiences glued to him.
And I want to show you that you haven't got him. Come on. Come with me.
He also had a voice and quick delivery that made his characters unforgettable. No one cared how tall he was when he filled the screen with that much force. Off-screen, Cagney was known for being grounded and surprisingly private compared to many of his peers. He even tried to leave Hollywood at times, frustrated with the studio system, but his popularity kept pulling him back. Humphrey Bogart. He wasn't the tall, dark stranger most people picture, but Humphrey Bogart still managed to become one of the most unforgettable leading men in Hollywood. With that rugged, world-weary look and a voice that mixed grit with wisdom, he ended up defining an entire era of film.
I said Mr. Geiger is not in.
I heard you. You needn't yell at me.
But the legendary star of Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon wasn't nearly as tall as audiences always assumed. Warner Brothers' publicity machine claimed he stood at 5'10", but in reality, Bogart was closer to 5'8". Some insiders even said he might have been as short as 5'6". Early in his career, when Bogart was playing gangsters and supporting roles in the 1930s, the studio didn't bother hiding his height. But once he became a leading man in films like High Sierra and the Maltese Falcon, Hollywood went all in on keeping him looking taller.
Yeah, I know. I spotted him.
What? What's that? What boy?
I don't know. A kid. He's been trailing me all evening.
That's where the bogey box came in, a small platform he'd stand on during scenes with taller co-stars. You can spot it most famously in Casablanca. Ingrid Bergman, his co-star, was about 5'9", which meant she actually stood eye to eye with him. To fix that, director Michael Curtis staged scenes with Bogart on steps, while Bergman was often seated.
You have any idea what you'd have to look forward to if you stayed here?
Cinematographer Arthur Edison also worked camera magic, using low angles and carefully placed shadows to make Bogart appear more imposing. Costume designer Ori Kelly dressed him in high-waisted suits with subtle vertical lines to give the impression of extra length. What's interesting is that Bogart himself didn't seem overly concerned about his height. Instead, he leaned into creating the persona that would make him a legend. His slightly hunched posture and tilted head, which many assumed were just part of his tough guy style, conveniently helped hide height differences when he stood next to taller actors. That very limitation may have shaped his iconic performance style.
Val Corliss.
Pleased to meet you.
I assure you the pleasure is mine.
Bogart didn't waste movement. He stood still, let his face and voice carry the emotion, and kept the focus on his presence rather than his frame. That restraint, born partly from necessity, became his signature. Warner Brothers worked hard to protect the illusion. Studio photos were carefully staged, and press events were tightly controlled so no one could casually compare Bogey's height in person. But at the end of the day, none of it really mattered. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was the kind of performer who could do it all. He sang, danced, acted, and told jokes with such brilliance that he quickly became one of the most versatile entertainers in history. His stage presence was so electrifying.
This is where it's all happening, baby. The rhythm of life. Number 7.
His energy so boundless that many fans were stunned when they learned he stood only 5 feet 3 inches tall, making him one of the shortest major male stars in Hollywood. As a black performer who faced both racial prejudice and the challenge of his height, Sammy pushed himself to master multiple fields. His versatility and technical perfection became the tools that helped him break through barriers others thought impossible. Unlike dramatic actors who often relied on tricks to appear taller, Sammy's performances naturally drew attention away from his height.
All right, hit it.
Hit it?
Hit it?
His dazzling footwork, expressive face, and powerful voice commanded focus. The audience was swept up in his energy, leaving little thought to his physical dimensions. That said, when it came to film roles where a more conventional leading man presence was needed, Davis did use some height-enhancing techniques. He regularly wore custom elevator shoes that added 2 or 3 extra inches both on and off stage. His signature high pompadour hairstyle gave him a bit more lift, while directors leaned on classic Hollywood tricks like low camera angles and clever blocking. On set, he was often placed on slightly raised platforms, or given higher ground when standing beside taller actors.
What about you, Sam?
Amy, did you see that Max is back?
His time with the Rat Pack could have been visually awkward, given he often shared the stage with much taller stars like Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra, but the group cleverly worked around it. Their choreography and staging placed Sammy in constant motion, while the others stayed more stationary, creating a sense of energy that erased the difference. Unlike many stars who were deeply insecure about their height, Sammy often laughed at it. He used self-deprecating humor as part of his charm. In one Rat Pack show, when Dean Martin teased him about his stature, Sammy instantly shot back, "I may be looking up at you physically, but musically, you're looking up at me." That quick wit summed up his confidence perfectly. Sammy himself once explained it best in an interview. "Being a short, one-eyed black man in show business meant I had to be 10 times better than everyone else just to get half the recognition. So that's what I became, 10 times better." Buster Keaton. He stood only 5 feet 5 inches tall, yet he became one of the biggest names in silent film history. Born in 1895 as Joseph Frank Keaton, he was introduced to the stage as a child when his father pulled him into the family's vaudeville act. But this was no gentle father and son routine. His dad literally tossed him around the stage, even sewing a suitcase handle into the back of his costume so he could swing him like luggage. It looked rough, but it taught Buster how to fall down stairs, tumble off rooftops, and crash through sets without serious injury. He learned how to twist in midair, how to land on his side, and how to protect his head every time. That was the beginning of his magic. By 1917, Buster moved from stage to screen. Suddenly, all that painful practice had a new purpose. His smaller frame actually helped him. With his center of gravity just under 3 feet from the ground, he was more stable than taller actors. A physics professor even explained that Keaton could withstand hits that would knock down a man 6 feet tall because his body was 10 to 12% harder to topple, and Keaton made full use of it. He performed stunts no one else dared to attempt. In Sherlock Jr., from 1924, he held onto a train's water spout as 2,000 liters of water crashed down on him, slamming him to the tracks. The impact fractured his neck, but he did not realize it until doctors discovered the injury 11 years later during an X-ray. Even that was not his most dangerous moment. In Steamboat Bill Jr., from 1928, a 4,000-pound building facade collapsed toward him, missing his head by only 3 inches. He survived because he had carefully marked the exact spot to stand on the night before. By 1927, Hollywood recognized his genius. He was earning $3,500 a week, which equals around $60,000 today, and he even had his own studio. Still, people joked about his height. In the general, towering Civil War soldiers dwarfed him like a misplaced drummer boy. In Our Hospitality, actors wore stilts to make them look smaller. Instead of being offended, Keaton embraced it. His deadpan face never changed, no matter how chaotic the scene, and that expression became his trademark. Audiences called him the Great Stone Face. George Raft. George Raft earned his reputation in the 1930s and 40s as the cool, menacing presence behind some of the era's most dangerous characters. Films like Scarface and Each Dawn I Die showcased a sleek, understated style that made him unforgettable. Raft's background as a professional dancer played a big role in shaping both his acting and how Hollywood managed his height. He carried himself with a controlled stillness, rarely using broad gestures.
The father has been waiting, and he's getting very impatient.
That's all right. I was just leaving.
A tilt of the head, a flicker of expression, or a slow shift in posture was often enough to convey menace. Warner Brothers, like most studios at the time, pulled out every trick in the book to give him a little extra presence. Low camera angles made his frame look more imposing, while pinstriped suits, high-waisted pants, and custom shoes with built-in lifts added a few visual inches. Casting choices mattered too. Raft was often paired with shorter actresses, and when taller actors were unavoidable, directors used platforms, steps, or clever blocking to keep the difference less noticeable.
All right. Take only volunteers.
His compact, athletic build gave him a kind of coiled energy, like a spring ready to snap at any second. As film historian Eddie Muller put it, Raft didn't need to tower over anyone to be frightening. His stillness and those cold, unblinking eyes carried all the threat he needed. Of course, publicity departments worked overtime to polish the illusion. Studio biographies often stretched him to 5'10", or even 6 feet, while photographers carefully arranged group shots to make him look taller. Yet Raft himself didn't seem overly concerned. That no-nonsense attitude paid off. As critic Andrew Sarris later noted, Raft's gangsters were never about size. Sal Mineo. Sal Mineo was never your typical Hollywood tough guy. What made him stand out was not his size, but the raw emotion and sensitivity he brought to the screen. In the 1950s, audiences could not take their eyes off him, especially in Rebel Without a Cause, where his heartbreaking performance alongside James Dean earned him an Academy Award nomination. He looked fragile, almost breakable, and that vulnerability became his strength.
Listen, did you ever think of making New York?
Most fans never realized that Sal stood only about 5 feet 6 inches tall. In Hollywood, where height could make or break a career, this was no small detail. Directors had to be careful with camera angles, blocking, and even wardrobe to make sure his stature did not overshadow his character. Elevated shoes, clever tailoring, and vertical lines in his costumes all helped create the illusion of extra height. Even his signature pompadour hairstyle was not just stylish, it quietly added a few visual inches, a trick many shorter actors relied on to level the field. Early in his career, when he was cast as troubled teenagers, his size made him look younger and more vulnerable, which fit those roles perfectly. Director Nicholas Ray even used the height difference between Sal and James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause to highlight Sal's character as the lost, fragile kid desperate for protection. The challenge came later. As Sal grew older and tried to move beyond his teenage years, his height became more of a hurdle. Hollywood leading men were expected to be tall, commanding figures, and Sal did not fit that mold. He was often typecast or overlooked for roles he had the talent to nail, simply because he did not measure up to the industry's narrow standards. Still, Sal did not always try to cover it up. Unlike some actors who worked tirelessly to appear taller, he sometimes leaned into his smaller stature when a role demanded vulnerability. Burgess Meredith. Burgess Meredith was the kind of actor who could disappear into almost any role. From his unforgettable turn as Mickey, the scrappy trainer in the Rocky series, to his colorful portrayal of the Penguin in the Batman television show, he built a reputation as someone who could bring even the most unusual characters to life. What many people never realized was that Burgess stood only 5 feet 5 inches tall. For an actor often asked to play authority figures or larger-than-life characters, that meant careful attention had to be paid to how he appeared on screen. Unlike traditional leading men, who were expected to look tall and commanding at all times, Burgess had a different advantage. As a character actor, he had the flexibility to use his size in whichever way best served the role. When playing Mickey in Rocky, his smaller stature was emphasized to highlight his gritty underdog quality. It made him seem like a fighter who had been through life's hardest rounds, perfectly matching the film's themes.
The idea that if you can move and you can hit without breaking the street.
But in other roles, especially when he played military officers or figures of authority, directors leaned on the usual Hollywood tricks. Burgess often wore elevator shoes, stood on raised platforms, and benefited from camera angles that made him look taller and more imposing. What made him stand out, though, was how his voice compensated for his modest height. His tone was rich, resonant, and powerful enough to fill any room. Director John Huston once said, "Burgess does not need height. He has a voice that fills any room and commands attention regardless of his size." That vocal dominance made physical dimensions seem almost irrelevant. Meredith also developed a unique physical style. He moved with precision, used economical gestures, and maintained flawless posture. This gave his performances weight and presence while helping manage how his height appeared on screen. Unlike some shorter actors who overcompensated with exaggerated energy, Burgess showed remarkable control. His restraint created a different kind of power, one rooted in subtlety, technique, and precision.
A trap when it springs. Hey!
Batman and Robin will never...
He himself rarely discussed his height. When asked, he would often brush it aside, saying, "An actor's job is to convince the audience of whatever the role requires. If I can make you believe I am a military commander or a boxing champion, then my actual dimensions are irrelevant." That professional focus on craft rather than appearance was what gave him one of Hollywood's longest and most respected careers. Frank Sinatra. His smooth singing and magnetic presence made him one of the 20th century's most iconic entertainers. On stage and on screen, he projected charisma so commanding that audiences assumed he must have been a tall, imposing figure. But the truth was different. Sinatra stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall, and some accounts suggest he may have been slightly shorter.
We segue now into a pretty song.
Well, I'm all for it.
I must say, you're very agreeable.
In a Hollywood that placed so much weight on physical stature, his height had to be carefully managed throughout his career. His fame as a singer created an image in the public's mind before most people ever laid eyes on him. By the time he appeared in films, that assumption worked in his favor. Still, when Sinatra shifted into serious acting, especially after his Academy Award-winning performance in From Here to Eternity, Hollywood used every tool available to enhance his screen presence. He regularly wore custom-made elevator shoes that added approximately 2 to 3 inches to his height. Cinematographers leaned on low camera angles, while directors carefully staged scenes to avoid drawing attention to the difference between Sinatra and his taller co-stars. With leading ladies like Doris Day and Deborah Kerr, both about 5 feet 7 inches themselves, blocking was adjusted so that Sinatra often stood on higher ground, or the women were seated during key moments. With taller male actors, similar strategies were used to keep comparisons subtle. But Sinatra had something most others did not: an aura that went beyond physical dimensions. His reputation, personality, and even his rumored ties to powerful circles gave him a dangerous edge that made him appear larger than life.
Oh, Pamela, you're not supposed to be doing this now. The photographers won't be here for half an hour yet.
The thing is, those newspapers do think of.
Director Gordon Douglas once said, "Frank carried himself like the most important man in any room, and because he believed it, everyone else did too." Unlike many shorter actors who struggled with insecurity, Sinatra seemed at ease with himself. While he consistently wore lifted shoes in public, he did not appear overly sensitive about his height. That quiet confidence only reinforced his image. This was especially true in his personal life. His marriage to Mia Farrow, who stood about 5 feet 9 inches and visibly towered over him in public, showed he was not afraid of the contrast. Instead of diminishing his image, it made him seem even more self-assured. Alan Ladd. When most people think of a Hollywood leading man, they imagine someone tall, broad-shouldered, and handsome even off camera. Alan Ladd, one of the biggest stars of the 1940s and 1950s, completely broke that picture. He became one of Hollywood's original tough guys at the box office, known for his piercing eyes and quiet intensity in films like This Gun for Hire and Shane. On screen, he seemed larger than life. Off-screen, he stood at about 5 feet 6 inches, with some even claiming he was shorter. It was considered unusually small for the kind of hard-edged roles he played, yet that never stopped him from becoming a legend.
That's a general idea. Throw it!
What most audiences never realized was how carefully his height was disguised. Directors used low camera angles, wooden platforms, and lifts in his shoes to prevent him from looking smaller than his co-stars. But what truly carried him was not tricks or illusions. It was his presence. Ladd's quiet, brooding intensity made him believable as a detective, a soldier, or a gunfighter. He did not need extra inches to seem commanding. His eyes and his voice did the work.
You ain't gonna drink that in here.
Behind the scenes, his height sometimes created challenges. When he was paired with taller actresses like Veronica Lake, the crew had to adjust sets so she would not tower over him in close-ups. Oddly enough, those same pairings became some of the most iconic on-screen couples of the Golden Age. While he was shorter than most imagined, he became one of the most bankable actors of his time. Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman may not have come from the Golden Age of Hollywood, but his story connects old-school tricks with a modern way of looking at height in film. Standing at about 5'6", he faced the same challenges as earlier short actors, yet instead of hiding it completely, he often let his stature become part of his characters. His big break came with the movie The Graduate in 1967. Director Mike Nichols used platforms and clever camera angles to boost Hoffman's presence, but he also leaned into the contrast between Hoffman's smaller frame and Anne Bancroft's commanding height. It wasn't just a cover-up, it added to the story of a nervous young man caught up in something bigger than himself. Hoffman's height often worked in his favor. In films like Midnight Cowboy, his smaller build reinforced the underdog roles he played, men fighting against tougher odds, whether it was society, the legal system, or life itself. Instead of pretending to be the conventional tall leading man, Hoffman built a career by embracing the idea that vulnerability could be just as powerful on screen as physical dominance. Of course, some old tricks still showed up. Hoffman wore platform shoes that added a couple of inches, and cinematographers adjusted angles to flatter him. Costumes were carefully designed with vertical lines to stretch his look. But unlike older stars whose studios tried to inflate their official height, Hoffman's publicity rarely mentioned it at all. The focus was kept on his craft, not his inches. Hoffman himself was always candid about it. He once joked that being short actually worked to his advantage because it forced him to sharpen his skills and pick roles that truly fit. "I was never going to be the typical leading man," he admitted, "so I had to find my own path." And that path made him one of the most respected actors of his generation.
So maybe he's just working out himself, or he's trying to see, can this guy who's basically...
Director Sidney Pollack summed it up best. Dustin doesn't try to be something he's not. He makes you forget about height by being unforgettable in every other way. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.